Ariez. Welcome to the CEO Sales Strategies Podcast. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
And you're from the sunny state of Florida, right? In the Miami
It-
area?
well, originally from the Midwest, but I live and work out of Miami now.
Midwest. What part of the Midwest? Curious.
Uh, Born in Ohio, but grew up mostly in Michigan, and then went to college there as well.
So are you a football fan by chance?
A big Michigan football fan. Grew up watching the team, and then went to college there. So it's kind of it's obligatory.
See, when I grew up, I was a little bit sheltered, I guess. And I flew out to actually Cincinnati, Ohio. And I turned on the radio and I was listening to the sports games there being broadcast on a local. And I never realized how crazy people are regarding football out there. It's almost like a religion from what I can understand. That's why I asked the question.
Yeah, it's in the Midwest and the South. Parts of the South, they're pretty crazy too. So.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Well, welcome. And why don't you tell everybody what you do?
Yeah, so I run a private equity firm that I started in 2017 with a partner of mine, and we focus on investing in family or founder-owned businesses here in the U.S. and Canada, with really a focus on two core sectors. One is healthcare, and then the second is what we call multi-location services businesses. These could either be consumer services or business services, but there's some aspect of the business that involves where growth is tied to physical expansion of the business. So it could be that the business has stores or clinics or some type of physical footprint. It could be they have trucks. It's a route-based network, and we've developed toolkits and other means of really growing those businesses. We tend to back existing founders and teams. So we love situations where there's an existing owner and they want to continue to be involved in the business in some respect, whether that's running the business or some other type of involvement. And I would say broadly, are focused on two areas when we get involved with the business. One is professionalization. And then the second is really trying to accelerate growth. So take a business that typically we're investing in businesses that have been growing. They have historic growth, and we're really trying to get comfortable and excited about our ability to work with them to inflect that upwards.
That sounds awesome. So just to kind of put context on this, I have a lot of family members. I have a family member that owns very successful music schools, actually in multiple locations
Sure.
right now, even in Texas. And he and I were talking about, and I'm not pitching, I'm just giving it for example. The we're talking about expansion. He's super, super, super profitable on these schools. And we were like, hey, you know what? If we can get 20 schools locally around the areas, that might be something that if somebody's listening to this going, hey, I need money and I want to talk to a PE type guy, would that be kind of in line, like B2C type school?
Knowing nothing except what you just told me, the short answer is yes. It's actually a space we've built a investment thesis around this space where it sounds like your family member's business would sit. We call it youth enrichment.
Yep.
So essentially, services being provided to children, everywhere from young children all the way through high school, and effectively, what are they doing after school or during the summer? And so music schools would be a great example of that. And we like a bunch of sort of macro trends and around that space. But so that's absolutely the type of business we would invest in. And, we look at these businesses in different ways, but existing business that has a footprint maybe in a certain geography. Say you've got, just to use this example, you've got schools, let's say in Houston and Dallas. There's a set of economics around those schools that we think are exciting and sustainable. And then we're looking at, well, does it make sense for us to invest behind a strategy of let's go open up more schools, whether it's in Texas or other places, and what
Mhm.
does that kind of look like from an investment perspective?
That's pretty cool. So one of the things, so we have a math-based, metrics-based revenue growth model that we work with people on. And one of the components of that is the ideal right fit buyer, knowing the ideal right fit buyer. And it seems like you're very clear on who your ideal right fit buyers are in the segments that you're picking. Was that purposeful? Or and the reason I ask this is because most companies out there don't know their ideal right fit buyers, in part or in full, right? So was that purposeful when you did that, or was it kind of like you learned that as you were going along?
And you mean from the perspective of what types of companies we're targeting?
Yes.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's evolved over time, right? Our firm strategy is not static. The types of companies we look for today aren't exactly the same as what we were looking for, let's say 8 years ago. But it's evolved. It's some combination, I think, of really what do we think is attractive? What are characteristics of companies we like that we feel like we can really understand, and then trying to match that with ultimately, we're running a business, and so it's great to have a theoretical idea of, we know these types of companies are interesting, but what's our ability to execute against that? So can we find interesting opportunities? Can we create an angle? Can we sell ourselves to those owners? And so I think we've chosen what we focus on with some combination of those two things. There's spaces that we like. We think there's major tailwinds behind them, but also we've had success actually executing deals and strategies in those spaces. And so when you combine those two things, it makes for we feel like a good strategy for an investment firm.
That's awesome. So here's the thing. A lot of companies I find, a lot of people in business I find, they really don't know the business of the business they're in. In other words, they think, like when I'll talk to them, let's say they are a roofing company, they're like, yeah, we're a roofer, right? Or if they're a manufacturer of bottles, they're like, yeah, we manufacture bottles, right?
Yeah.
And then I ask them a question all the time, and I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this. I ask them, what business are you really in? And they kind of like step back and think a little bit, and they're like, well, what are you asking? And I say, well, if nobody buys your bottles or your lids or your roofing or music lessons or whatever, right? You really don't have a business. You have a concept. That's what you deliver as a product or service. And so when people come and they want to grow their revenue, doesn't the focus have to be on client acquisition, which is the real business that we're all in? Is my question.
Yeah, I think ultimately, right. I mean, you can offer a service product or a service, but offering it does not mean people are buying it.
Right.
And so I think so maybe kind of connecting those two, you need to have a value prop, let's say proposition in the roofing space that you feel like we provide a great service, we're price competitive, our offering is attractive for XYZ reasons, but you need to match that against a strategy of how do you find customers, how do you get them to buy into your story, and then ultimately contract with you and do a sale. So I think it's very typical that we'll see businesses. I mean, roofing's a great example actually, where you've had a lot of investor interest in that space in the last couple of years, and one of the reasons is oftentimes the entrepreneurs or business owners, they built a business usually on the smaller end, and there's oftentimes just a lack of kind of sophistication around the sales strategy,
Right.
and creating repeatable processes and everything that deliver on your value proposition.
So let's talk about repeatable processes, because a lot of people they get the concept, right? It's like, oh yeah, I got to have something that's repeatable. McDonald's, right? You walk in, fryer later is always on the left, and that's an operational process, but they still have a sales process which is duplicatable, which allowed them in the beginning to actually use like teenagers to run the company, really, in the beginning. Um, so how does one create a repeatable process? Like, let's say they're sitting there today and they go, okay, I need a repeatable process. What are some of the steps they might run through to actually accomplish that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I first sort of foundational element is making sure that are you repeating something that works, or, are you creating a process that's the right, creating something that's repeatable that is not effective, obviously is counterproductive, to sort of maybe state the obvious. But I think that's sort of foundational step one. Um, I think, I think I would start with I mean, there's some tactical things. One is getting things written down.
Yep.
And so oftentimes there's knowledge in a small or medium-sized business that is institutional. So there's people at the company that have this knowledge. It could be your head salesperson, it could be the CEO, the owner, whoever it might be, right? They're excellent at what they do. They know how to do it. But if they were to, get hit by a bus tomorrow, that knowledge goes away. So I think
Mhm.
getting it written down, like literally written down in a document that is shareable and whatnot is important. I think that's one step. I think the second is I would think about, who at the organization can champion that. So it could be that person that has that knowledge. It could be someone under them, but who's someone that's able to take that knowledge, get it written down, and then turn it into a system, and train people on it. So the ability to connect with other people in the org and train them. And then I think a third thing I would be thinking about is there's so many tools in terms of technology that you can use to force kind of systemization. And sort of force people to follow a process. So it's not just that, hey, here's a written checklist of what you need to do, but you can actually use the technology to force, like, you can't go to this next step in the sales process, as one example, until you've completed these other steps. Like, the iPad or the screen will not let you, as an example, or you there's certain things you need to fill in to get it entered into our system. So I think using technology in that way to force systemization is another tool.
I love the last one, especially because so many people, they create process, and then my top performers, well, they're not following the process, right? It's like they're frustrated with this thing. They like, I've got SOPs, I've got this. I look at companies every once in a while, and they're like, they got all their SOPs, and it's like 10% of their sales team's actually following the SOP. But the fact that you just brought up, and folks, write that one down, please. You got to force the accountability to the process. I mean, imagine, like, one of my pet peeves right now, Ariez, is I'm driving down the highways. You're in Florida, so maybe you can relate to this. You're driving down the highway, the speed limit's posted very clearly, and 63% or whatever the number is, just not even looking at the speed limit. I was on I-4 one time, highway, folks, going across the east to west in Florida, and I went by a police officer at 104 miles an hour, and they didn't even blink. But then I realized that I'm actually at pace with traffic.
We have terrible drivers here in South Florida, for sure.
Then one person went from the far left lane all the way to the far right lane, 4 lanes, just to take an exit, and did it in about 3 seconds. And so I'm giving you this analogy, folks, because if you don't force the accountability, that's what it's going to feel like in your sales team and your sales process. And here's the thing about salespeople. If there isn't that process, they're going to make it up because they're going to want to sell. Your top producers will do this. In fact, they'll sell stuff you don't even have sometimes. Um, so,
Yeah, and I
um,
think, I mean, sort of a related point with the point I was making around technology is, you have it's sort of the other side of the coin, which is you have a piece of technology, but then people aren't it's only as good as the extent to which you use it. The classic example, I mean, we have a CRM in our business, for example, where we
yeah,
keep contacts of companies, other, bankers that we work with, all sort of our firm contacts. That database is only useful to the extent that there's compliance with consistency in terms of how do we put it in, making sure the data is clean, that we're periodically removing people, all of that. Otherwise, we have this piece of technology. It's potentially extremely powerful, but if we're not using it or we're not using it consistently, then you know, it's marginally useful, or we're only getting
it's that that's
a
that's
little
a
bit out of it.
super good point. It's like when people used to have in the old days VCRs or and they would be like, what does all this stuff do? Who cares? Just put the tape in and it plays, right? And so if I heard the pattern right, first step is you got to have something that works. And I'm going to repeat that back because there's so many people that create a process that it's not, they stop, they create it and then they stop. And it's like, well, this part's broken. Just keep going. And what they don't realize is bleed all throughout the sales process is happening. So, it's the old adage. There was an old joke, I think, from the medical community. Guy walks in and goes, Doc, my arm hurts when I do this. And the doc says, well, stop doing that. Right. That type of thing. And it's got to be written down. And loved what you said there because it's like, we're all so busy. We really need to hire somebody to actually help us get this written down in most cases. And so, folks, those of you who are listening, invest a few dollars into the process to create this process. And then once you have it written down, otherwise what ends up happening is what's called tribal training, information passed down from human to human to human to human. And, here's the thing, owners, Reese, you can refute this or agree with it. Most of you don't know how to transfer your skill because you're the owner. And when you're the owner, it's your baby. You birthed it, you brought it up, you got a process down. But if you can't duplicate yourself, you end up building a business on your back.
Yeah, and very common. I would say it's one of the main reasons that people come to us for help is they're bumping up against the ceiling of how much that mode of working can only take you so far.
Yeah.
Where you become a point of failure. There's only so many hours in the day, and that you reach a point where there's an inability to scale because you, as the owner, are just too much of a choke point for the business. One thing I would say too, Doug, is that, I mean, in my experience, getting these systems put in place can be very painful. So it's a ton of time, it's a ton of work, and everyone is kind of a human. It's easier oftentimes to just default to what you're doing, especially if it's working, right? Yeah. It's not that, hey, our sales are crashing or we can't get any customers. And maybe that we're growing fine, but we know we could be growing more, or we could have bigger dreams if we had these systems and processes. And so I would recognize it is very painful. I think you have to sort of push through that and recognize that transition in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, to get this put together, put it out through the org, get people trained, have some fits and starts. That's going to be very painful. But once you get on the other side of it, people, you hear this all the time. It's like, we don't know how we did this. How do we ever operate before we did this? Right. Like it's night and day difference.
It's like going to the dentist in some regards. You got to go, but you don't want to go. But when you do go, and then they finally clear up the thing that's been bothering you for 2 years, you're like, oh gosh, okay, my life's quality. I just had this experience in an operation. I had to have my hip replaced, and for 6 years I put it off. And it got to a point where it was just like, I was like dragging my leg on the beach. I looked like a snail or something that, went along the beach. But they did it. And within a week, I'm walking around and the pain's completely gone. All the other pains in my body were completely gone. And here's the point, to back up your point. There were a lot of indicators along the way that I could have been a heck of a lot better than I was, but I was neglecting it and gritting it through and powering it through and just saying, oh, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, exactly.
When it comes to business, what I've learned, and, my dad built the business on his back. My dad started an industrial machine company in 1962, was super successful. And he was the business. We had 14 employees in the company at the time. And my father walked in 1980, turned the key in the door and walked away. And I asked him why. He said, I just can't take it anymore. I'm going fishing. And that was the end of the business. And I said to him, I said, Dad, well, why don't we sell this thing? Because, we can sell this thing for probably $2-3 million at this point. And, when we build a business on our back, it doesn't get easier as we add more success to the business. And so, to your point, if we can't scale that business without us, we essentially have a high paid job, really, when it comes down to it.
I think that's right. And I think another piece of this where that becomes really challenging is when people want to sell their business or sell a portion of it,
Good point.
because, you know, and it's hard to talk in broad brushes, but when we look at a business, I mean, ultimately we want to, if it's too oriented around a single person or single point of failure, um, that that's a negative, right?
Yeah.
From our perspective, that's a negative. That doesn't mean we won't invest in it or we wouldn't buy the business, but it's something that we have to kind of like work around. And we have to have a plan to change how that business looks. And when we need to change it, that introduces risk and other issues. And so, and I would say it's not uncommon for us to say, hey, we like this business, but it's got this owner that is central to everything that's going
Yep.
on. And that owner wants to now work part-time, or they want to retire in 2 years. And we say, hey, that doesn't work. And I think a lot of owners do not. You need to be planning ahead. If you're thinking of, hey, I'm approaching retirement age, I want to transition my business, I need to transition my business to someone else. Well, you have to create a business and an organization that someone else can take and work with. And it's not as simple as just saying, well, everyone's going to stay, but I'm going to leave and I'll stay for 6 months and teach you how to run the business. That's usually not a sufficient answer for like a private equity investor.
I think this point is super, super important that people should know, because there are a lot of businesses out there that they want to sell and they can't. They want to transition it. Maybe they want to go from one generation to the other generation doesn't want it. And the business essentially just dies. But there's been 34 years of goodwill built up in this business. But if it's centrally located around one individual, essentially you have a you have a successful mini movie star in the business. And it's like, let's say that, I don't know, pick any actor, right? I mean, Clint Eastwood, he's still around, most people know him. But when Clint was doing all the movies, especially, the cowboy movies of Dirty Harry, when he was Dirty Harry, you can't replace Dirty Harry with someone else.
Right.
And have it be the same thing. I mean, they tried that with the Bourne Legacy, didn't work out, right? So, Matt Damon's Matt Damon, and so
I mean, I saw this. I'll just give you kind of a clear example. I saw this with a business I was looking at a couple months ago, which was it was a dealer and installer of playground equipment.
yeah,
For schools and local parks and things like that. Sizable business, like large and $30+ million sales business. And they had put together materials to try to sell this business. And there's two founders, they both wanted to transition out of the business because I think they were aging out or wanted to do something else. And they had a page in their materials that showed with the sales, percentage of sales in the last year by salesperson. And the top two producers, which accounted for something like 50% of sales, were the two founders of the business. There are a lot of things to like about this business, but it's immediately a red flag. You've got the two top salespeople that account for half the business sales in the last year want to exit out. Well, how are we going to replace them, right? And so I think that's an example where you need to be solving that problem like years in advance of trying to sell the business. And really think through it thoughtfully.
So when we go to sell a business, and you're talking about thinking years in advance, should we be thinking, from a private equity point of view, should we be thinking we should be getting involved with a private equity company to get all this, get some funds, get things in place that need to happen? because ultimately a sale of a business happens to the right person who wants, well, in most cases, should be to the right person who actually wants the business. So we should be grooming that business for, if we're planning on selling, correct me if I'm incorrect, but I would build the business for the ultimate buyer of that business over those years of period of time, because then it should be worth more money and the sale should go through easier. It's like finding the ideal right fit buyer for the person who wants to buy your business. Is that
I think the
okay?
smartest, I think the smartest or savviest business owners are thinking ahead of time about what, first of all, some business owners don't want to sell their business, and that's great. I mean, there's nothing that says you have to eventually sell your
Right.
business. So I would say that. But if you're eventually thinking like, hey, I want to get liquidity for what I've built, or my children don't want to take it over, whatever, I want to go do something else, whatever it might be. Um, I think the smartest owners are thinking about, well, who is the likely buyer for this in the future? Or here's a couple different, I think, there's a couple different types of buyers, and what are they going to want to see? And what are the things that they're going to give me extra value for? What are the things that they're going to kind of ding me for in terms of value? And you want to try to solve for that. We do this every time we invest in a business. We, as part of our planning, we're thinking about where do we want to take this business over, 4 or 5, 6 years, whatever it might be. We're trying to think about, okay, the business looks like this today. We know who the potential buyers are down the road, but like, what do we need to, what do we want this business to look like several years from now that's going to really maximize value? So that could be the team. It could be certain technology we need to be using. It might be the business mix. 80% of our sales are this type of customer today. We need to reduce that. It could be that you have one customer that's very concentrated and you want to bring that concentration down. It could be that you're only in one geography, but you're going to get more value if you're in two geographies. It could be that you have margins that are lower than the industry. If you can get the margins closer to where the industry's at, you're going to get more value. I mean, all these different things, right? It's going to vary by sector and subsector, but I think you want to think ahead of time for what are people going to be looking for. Otherwise, you get to the point where you want to sell the company, and then you're going through that learning process as you're trying to sell the company. And sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't.
I think most of the time it doesn't work out as favorably as the owner would want it to work out. It's kind of like making mistakes all the way along trying to date someone and then correcting those mistakes. It gets kind of rocky through the relationship in the beginning of that. And most relationships don't survive that.
Yeah, or I mean, I see this, it's just kind of a crude analogy, but if you look at like people trying to sell their house, and sometimes you see people, they'll list for a really aggressive price, but there's some issue with, there's some issue they keep hearing from potential buyers, right? I don't know, the kitchen's really dated, or it's, only only 3 bedrooms. People in this price point are really looking for 4 or more bedrooms, and it's you're sort of getting that feedback once you've gone into the market and tried to sell it. And it's very common on the business side where, we see this all the time. People will hire an advisor to go sell their business. They start talking to people like us, and then they're learning, okay, people really have an issue with our customer concentration or whatever it might be. And they're not able to sell the business, or it's not at a price, they're expecting $50 million and everyone's coming in at 35.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that can be a way to do it. You sort of you're learning, you're testing the market. Maybe you're not getting what you want, and then you pull it, and then you come back a couple of years later. But I think it's less time consuming and easier if you can kind of figure those things out ahead of that sale process.
What I love about this conversation is if we want to increase our revenues, we need to know what our clients value, what they want, what they're willing to pay for, the amount of money they're willing to do for the value exchange. And we look for ideal clients in that factor. If we're intelligent about, we want to grow it. It's a lot easier to do it with the better clients than it is to just try to sell to anybody and everybody. And but when it comes to selling the business, I love the analogy to the house because it's so people walk in, they go, oh, the house is great. Oh, man, the kitchen is all, and man, I'm gonna have to spend $110,000 to put a new kitchen in this place, right? And they're doing all of this in their head, and the house is sitting. And then 90 days later, they're like, well, we need to do a price reduction on this house. So maybe I don't know, maybe it's a $1.5 million house. So they reduced the house by $110,000 or whatever, right? But if they just stuck the $110,000 in, they probably would have got asking price versus someone coming in at 1.39 going, I got to put a new kitchen in here. So I'll offer $50,000 or $70,000 less. And am I getting this concept correct? Because to me, that's what I heard loud and clear.
Yeah, I think you're highlighting something else, which is also something that we see, and I think it's a benefit actually bringing on oftentimes an outside investor is that we are oftentimes the ones that are pushing to invest more in the business. Like, hey, we need to build out more of a professional management team, or we need to invest in some software and systems. And I think for business owners, if you own 100% of a business, there's no separation between your business and your personal finances. For most, every business owner knows this intimately, right? I
Yes.
mean, you're sometimes too intimately with running expenses through the business that shouldn't be run through there, but it's a separate conversation. But so when they're thinking about, well, hey, I want to hire out like more people on my management team, it's not just a decision around how do we scale the business and grow the equity value of the business. It's also something that affects their personal cash flow. So
Yes.
I go make that investment, and yeah, it's going to pay off over a couple of years, but it also means that I'm bringing home less cash at the end of the day this year. And I think for a lot of business owners, understandably, it's a bit of it's a mindset shift, or it's psychologically difficult to make those decisions. And when you bring in someone like us, we kind of have a little bit of an opposite perspective, which is we're thinking about how do we build enterprise value in the company, equity value in the company over the course of like 5 years. And we're not, I mean, of course, we focus on cash flow and things like that, but we're not myopically saying, hey, we hire this new person for $150,000. It's going to affect us in the next 6 months. We're thinking about how do we change the look and feel of this business and also accelerate its growth to get us to that point 5 years from now where we've really created a lot of value. And so we sort of move those decisions, we depersonalize them from being something that's like, this is about your personal finances and it's all about 100% on you, to now we're sort of doing this together.
So would it be fair to say that if somebody wanted to use a company like yours, a private equity company, investors in general, that we should look at our businesses as a government looks at our businesses as it's a separate entity? If we formed a corporation, it's a corporation, we're somebody within the corporation. In other words, it's okay for us to personally feel like we want to grow the company and grow this, but to understand that it's actually a separate entity from ourselves. And therefore we have to run that entity as how the business world demands it. Money in, money out equals break even, loss, or profit. And we look at the business that way through a different lens than, oh my gosh, I've had this, landscaping business for, 12 years. And now I'm going to bring someone else in there and the whole business is going to change. And even though I'm going to make way more money or it's going to be bigger, blah, blah, blah. I'm losing my personalization in the business, and that's probably not the right way to say it. I'm losing my personal connection as I know it today. So therefore, I don't want that to change, and therefore, I kind of limit or stagnate my own growth. Am I hitting a button that
I think
should
you're
be or should
hitting
not?
on. I think it's a more I think it's a more balanced conversation, which is we want when we come in and buy, usually we're buying a piece of someone's business. We're not buying 100%. So it'd be very common for us to say we're going to buy 60, 70, 75% of the business. But let's say you're a business owner, dog. We want you to continue to own 20, 30, 40, 49% of the business. So you have a really, and what does that mean? It means, one, you're still an owner of the business. you're probably the single largest individual owner of the business outside of us as an investment firm. So you're still an owner, right? You're not becoming like an employee. And that's really important for us because we want you to continue to act like an owner. Um, and I think the second is it means you have a really meaningful economic stake in what happens with this business. And anytime we get involved with the business, we want that. Let's say you're selling 70% of the business today and you're retaining 30%. We want the value of that 30% to be worth more 5 years from now than the 70% you're selling today. How do we get there? We have to grow the business together. Um, and so I don't think I don't think it's what we're not saying is, hey, we want you to sell and we want you to completely change what you're doing. And we now want you to become an employee. We're usually saying we want you to continue to be an owner, oftentimes continue to lead the business, but let's let's add in some things, whether it's infrastructure, it's team, it's investing in sales and marketing, it's going and doing acquisitions. Let's go maybe do some things together that maybe you felt like you've been limited in terms of what you can do when you own 100% of the business. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm going to say this because I mean this in all truth. Listeners, you've been listening to me for a long time, so thank you. But this is probably, if not the first time I've ever heard someone who has a private equity firm talk in this regard. To the point where it's like we're collaborating with you and we want you to grow in addition. And one of the fears of people who are going to, like, I'll talk to a PE firm, but they think when they're going in, this PE firm is just going to take my company, rip it down. You know, I'm a jigsaw puzzle. They're going to take 70% of the jigsaw puzzle and they don't care about the other 30% anymore. They're just going to make some money, burn it, churn it, and we're done. And I'm not hearing that's your methodology at all. I'm hearing it's the exact opposite. It's like you're the nirvana of PE, what I'm hearing. So am I getting this correct, or is this?
I'm not sure I would say I'm the nirvana of PE, but I appreciate the compliment. I think like private equity is this kind of, it's a very broad term, right? And uh, private equity has, I think, deservedly kind of a mixed reputation. When it works out well, it works out really well. When it doesn't go well, it's not great for anyone. Um, and different firms have different philosophies. Everyone looks the same from the outside. I mean, literally, go to any private equity firm's website, they all kind of look the same,
Yeah.
including our website. People come from the same schools, they have the same backgrounds, they talk about the same things. So from the outside, it's very difficult to kind of ascertain how does this firm operate versus that firm. And it's I think a longer conversation around like how do you figure that out and find the right person. What I can say for us is that ultimately we're investing in businesses that are doing well. We do not invest in turnarounds. We don't invest in businesses that have massive issues. And so what does that mean? It means we're investing in a good business, and we're not looking, if we're investing in a good business, why would we want to come in day one and say we're going to change everything you're doing? That what we're really looking to do is we're trying to say you've built a good business. Maybe it's a great business and it's almost always growing. Maybe it's growing quite quickly, but we're trying to figure out how do we take what you've built? How do we take that growth that's already happening and how do we kind of supercharge it? And how do we take a good business, make it great, take a great business, make it even bigger. And so what that usually means is we're not coming in day one and like changing everything that you do. We're trying to kind of supplement, find ways to involve ourselves. And so yeah, so I think it's a different look and feel where we're not saying, we close the deal and then it's like some massive difference in how we're operating or something like that. And we're usually talking with the owner and the seller of the business. We're spending a bunch of time with them before we even get the deal done. We're coming up with a plan together in terms of what are we going to do. And we're taking their input and, and like I said, oftentimes they're continuing to lead the business. So they are the critical person. They continue to be the critical person in terms of making decisions and operating the business. So So maybe slightly, long answer to your question, but I think a lot of different things to think about, I guess, when you're thinking of partnering with a private equity firm.
Yeah, I think it's a great answer. Appreciate the answer. Appreciate you being here. How do people get to contact with you? I imagine there's some people like they're like thinking, man, I got to talk to this guy.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from anyone. Even if you're not sure what you want to do, or you just, you know, we'd love to get to know people like years ahead of them even potentially doing anything, or try to be helpful, even if it doesn't involve us. So feel free to reach out. You can go to our website. It's got all our contact info. Feel free to send me an email. Our website's www.nbgroup.us. And you can find out more about our firm and our email addresses and all of that. But love to hear from people.
Excellent. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes. And folks, I recommend if you're, like you just said, if you're even thinking, because here's the thing: if you're thinking about selling your business down the line, exiting the business of some sort, as Ariez said, it is super important you start doing it now for the future. Don't wait and then get to a point where it's like my dad did, where he just couldn't take it anymore. And if he was going to sell, he would have taken any buyer that would have, made an offer at that point. And it's one of those things that it does take, remember this, folks, it usually takes 2 to 3 times longer than you figure it's going to take you to actually get things done. And sometimes, I would say more often, it takes you 2 to 3 times more money to do what you think you're going to do too, as when you originally started it out. So it is super helpful to get the help of professionals who know what they're doing. Tony Robbins calls it modeling, right? Where you find somebody who's been there, done that, figure out what they're doing. They'll tell you, help you, whatever, and you get there a lot faster. And Ariez, that's what I'm hearing in this conversation from the PE side from you. So thank you so much for coming on the CEO Sales Strategies podcast and bringing your, A++ game. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it, Doug. Thanks for having me.